April 28, 1945. Northern Germany. Railway siding 7 kilometers west of Lübeck. A column of freight cars sat motionless on the tracks, 23 cars, windows boarded, doors secured with external bolts. Guards positioned at intervals along the platform, 17 German soldiers, rifles held across their chests. No movement from inside the cars. No sound. The afternoon was overcast, temperature cool, wind light from the north. 300 meters west, concealed in a tree line, a British reconnaissance platoon observed through field glasses. 31 men, 2 Bren guns, 1 radio operator. They had been in position for 47 minutes. The platoon commander, a lieutenant, held binoculars to his eyes. He had counted the guards. He had noted the sealed cars. He had observed the station master's office, the signal box, the water tower. Standard railway infrastructure. No civilians visible. Behind the platoon, 2 Cromwell tanks waited with engines off. The tank commanders stood in their turrets, hatches open, watching the lieutenant. The company captain was 3 kilometers back at battalion headquarters, receiving updated orders via radio. The lieutenant's orders were clear: observe and report. Do not engage unless engaged. The guards had not noticed the British position. The situation remained static. The lieutenant lowered his binoculars and checked his watch. 14:37 hours. He raised them again. The train had not moved. The British unit was part of the 11th Armoured Division, advancing northeast toward the Baltic coast. Their mission was to secure the approaches to Lübeck before Soviet forces arrived from the east. The railway line ran through their sector. Intelligence indicated German forces were using rail transport to move personnel and equipment westward, away from the Soviet advance. All trains were considered potential military targets. The platoon had encountered the stationary train at 13:50 hours while conducting a sweep of the rail corridor. Initial assessment: military transport under guard. The sealed freight cars suggested cargo, possibly ammunition, possibly equipment, possibly prisoners. German forces in the area were fragmenting. Some units were surrendering. Others were attempting to reach British lines to avoid Soviet capture. Others continued organized resistance. The situation was fluid. The guards appeared to be regular Wehrmacht infantry. Their positioning suggested security detail rather than combat readiness. They stood at intervals, facing outward, weapons held but not aimed. Their posture indicated routine duty, not anticipation of contact. They had established no perimeter defense, no machine gun positions, no observation posts. The station master's building showed no signs of command presence. This was a transport detail, not a defensive position. The terrain offered concealment but limited cover. The tree line where the British platoon positioned itself was adequate for observation but would not withstand sustained fire. The distance to the railway was 300 meters of open ground, former farmland, now neglected, with waist-high grass. Approaching unseen would be impossible. An assault would require crossing exposed terrain under direct fire from 17 rifles. Standard tactical calculation. Acceptable losses if the target justified the risk. The boarded windows on the freight cars were unusual. Military cargo did not require window concealment. Ammunition was transported in specialized wagons. Equipment was secured with canvas covers, not wooden boards. The external bolts suggested contents that required containment, not just security. The lieutenant had noted this detail in his initial report to company headquarters. Company had requested clarification. The lieutenant had none to provide. The cars remained sealed. The contents remained unknown. Weather conditions were neutral. Visibility extended to approximately 1 kilometer. Cloud cover was uniform, reducing shadows and contrast. Temperature was dropping as afternoon progressed toward evening. Ground conditions were firm but damp from recent rain. Vehicle movement would be audible. Infantry movement would be slower than normal due to the tall grass. Time was a factor. Daylight would last another 4 hours. The battalion's advance was scheduled to resume at 16:00. The railway line needed to be secured or bypassed. A decision was required. British doctrine for encountering military targets emphasized speed, aggression, and decisive action. Reconnaissance units were expected to identify, report, and when feasible, neutralize enemy assets. A guarded transport train met the definition of a viable target. The presence of guards indicated military value. The stationary position suggested vulnerability. Standard procedure would be to engage. The lieutenant had been trained at officer school and had served in Northwest Europe since D-Day. He understood the tactical framework. The platoon could establish fire positions at the tree line. The Bren guns could suppress the guards. The tanks could provide direct fire support. Infantry could advance under covering fire, secure the train, and determine the contents of the freight cars. The operation would take approximately 15 minutes. Expected casualties: minimal, given the disparity of force and the element of surprise. The guards appeared to be low-quality troops. Their age distribution was wide. Some appeared to be in their 40s, possibly older. Their equipment was standard but worn. Their discipline was adequate but not sharp. They moved occasionally, shifting weight, adjusting rifle slings, speaking to each other. They did not scan the horizon systematically. They did not rotate observation duties. They appeared to be waiting, not guarding against imminent threat. This suggested they did not expect contact. This suggested vulnerability. The sealed freight cars presented an operational question. If they contained prisoners, Allied prisoners of war, then engagement could result in friendly casualties. British doctrine prohibited firing on structures containing friendly personnel, but the doctrine assumed knowledge of contents. The lieutenant did not know what was in the cars. He could not know without closer inspection. Closer inspection required either approaching under truce or securing the site by force. Approaching under truce was not recommended in fluid combat situations. Securing by force was the default option. The radio operator had reported their position and situation to company headquarters at 14:10. Company had acknowledged and requested they maintain observation. At 14:25, company had radioed again. Battalion was coordinating with intelligence regarding the train. Stand by for further orders. The lieutenant had acknowledged. The platoon had remained in position. The guards had remained at the train. The standoff had continued. 14:35, the company captain's voice came through the radio. Prepare to engage on my command. Confirm target status. The lieutenant confirmed, train stationary, 17 guards, no movement, no civilians, no indication of contents. The captain acknowledged, stand by. The lieutenant briefed his section leaders. The Bren gunners established firing positions. The tank commanders oriented their turrets toward the railway. Everyone waited. The order to engage would come. This was the pattern. This was how operations proceeded. At 14:41, the radio crackled again. The captain's voice: wait, do not engage, await further orders. The lieutenant acknowledged. He did not ask why. Radio discipline prohibited unnecessary transmission. He lowered the handset. The section leaders looked at him. He made a small gesture with his hand, hold position. They nodded. They did not ask questions. Orders were orders. The Bren gunners remained aimed at the railway. The riflemen remained prone along the tree line. The tank commanders remained in their turrets, eyes on the train. Everyone waited. The guards at the railway continued their routine. They had not detected the British presence. They showed no change in behavior. The scene remained static. Minutes passed. 5, then 10. The lieutenant checked his watch repeatedly. 14:46, 14:51, 14:55. No further radio transmission, no new orders, just silence from company headquarters and stillness at the railway. The tactical situation had not changed. The target remained viable. The guards remained vulnerable. But the order to engage had not been given. At 15:03, one of the guards walked to the nearest freight car and knocked on the door. A muffled sound came from inside, indistinct but clearly human. The guard stepped back. He said something to another guard. They both looked at the car. Neither moved to open it. The sound stopped. The guards returned to their positions. The lieutenant had observed this through binoculars. He did not radio company headquarters. He had been told to wait. He waited. The platoon's tension began to shift. Initial readiness for combat remained, but uncertainty grew. Why the delay? Why no engagement? The target was static. The opportunity was clear. Yet no order came. The soldiers maintained discipline. They did not speak. They did not move from positions. But confusion was visible in small shifts of posture, slight turns of head, quiet glances toward the lieutenant. He gave no explanation. He had none to give. Time stretched. The afternoon light began its slow transition toward evening. Shadows lengthened incrementally. The temperature dropped by degrees. The lieutenant's watch showed 15, 17, 36 minutes since the order to wait. The tactical situation remained unchanged. The train remained stationary. The guards remained at their posts. The British platoon remained concealed in the tree line. The radio operator checked his equipment twice, ensuring the set was functioning properly. It was. The frequency was correct. The battery was charged. The radio worked. No transmissions were being received because none were being sent. Company headquarters had gone silent. This was unusual. Standard procedure required regular updates during active operations. The silence suggested either communication breakdown or deliberate withholding of information. The radio operator looked at the lieutenant with a questioning expression. The lieutenant shook his head slightly. No action required. At 15:24, movement occurred at the railway. A German officer emerged from the station master's building. He wore a peaked cap and a long coat. He walked to the nearest guard and spoke briefly. The guard gestured toward the freight cars. The officer nodded. He walked along the platform, examining each car in turn. He did not open any doors. He appeared to be conducting an inspection or inventory. After several minutes, he returned to the building. The guards remained at their posts. The train remained stationary. The British soldiers began to experience the physical strain of prolonged readiness. Muscles tensed for action but denied release developed cramps. Positions that had been comfortable initially became sources of discomfort. Soldiers shifted slightly, trying to maintain both concealment and circulation. The Bren gunners adjusted their grips. The riflemen flexed their fingers quietly. The tank commanders remained standing in their turrets, but their postures showed fatigue. At 15:39, nearly an hour after the initial wait order, the lieutenant decided to request clarification. He instructed the radio operator to contact company headquarters. The operator keyed the handset. 0 Alpha, this is 2-3, request status update. Pause, static. Then the captain's voice, quieter than before, 2-3, maintain current position. Do not engage, repeat, do not engage, will advise. The lieutenant acknowledged. The transmission ended. The section leaders looked at the lieutenant for guidance. He had none to provide beyond the orders he had received. Maintain position. Do not engage. The tactical logic was unclear. A viable target. No friendly forces at risk. No apparent complication. Yet the order stood. The platoon would wait because waiting was what they had been instructed to do. Doctrine was clear on one point. Orders were followed unless they were illegal or impossible. This order was neither. It was simply unexplained. The afternoon continued its progression toward evening. The light dimmed gradually. The temperature continued dropping. The British soldiers waited. The German guards waited. The sealed freight cars remained motionless on the tracks, and the silence between the two forces, 300 meters of empty ground, held without breaking. At 16:12, the radio transmitted again. The captain's voice was formal, measured. 2-3, intelligence has confirmed train contents. Civilian evacuees. Concentration camp survivors. German Red Cross documentation verified through separate channels. The guards are detachment assigned to prevent Soviet interception. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. Acknowledge. The lieutenant acknowledged immediately. The information clarified everything. The sealed freight cars did not contain military cargo. They contained people, victims of the camps, being moved westward by German authorities in the final days of the war. The external bolts were not to contain prisoners, but to prevent interference during transport. The guards were not defending military assets, but protecting civilians from Soviet forces advancing from the east. The captain continued, "Battalion has negotiated temporary safe passage. Guards will remain until British medical units arrive. ETA 1700 hours. Your platoon will secure the perimeter at distance. No direct contact with German personnel unless they initiate hostile action. Acknowledge." The lieutenant acknowledged. The captain signed off. The lieutenant briefed his section leaders quietly. The information was passed along to the soldiers in fragments, whispered from position to position. The freight cars contained civilians. Engagement was prohibited. Medical support was en route. The mission had shifted from potential combat operation to security detail. The soldiers absorbed this information without visible reaction. They had been prepared to fire. Now they would not fire. Orders had changed. They adapted. The reason for the initial delay became clear in retrospect. Battalion headquarters had received intelligence about the train's cargo during the observation period. They had requested verification through intelligence channels, possibly liaison with advancing Allied medical units, possibly communication with German Red Cross representatives operating in the region. Verification had taken time. During that time, the lieutenant's platoon had been held in position to prevent premature engagement. The wait order had not been caution. It had been protection. The sealed freight cars had likely been boarded to provide some insulation during transport and to prevent observation by passing military units who might misidentify the cargo. The external bolts were standard railway security measures. The guards' relaxed posture made sense in context. They were not defending against attack, but maintaining presence to demonstrate German authority over the transport and prevent unauthorized interference from either Soviet or German forces operating without coordination. The decision not to engage had been made at battalion level, possibly higher, based on intelligence that the lieutenant did not possess at the time. His role had been to wait for information that would determine action. He had waited. The information had arrived. The action had been determined to be non-action. The operation that had been prepared, assault on a military transport, had dissolved into a security detail for civilian evacuation. The difference was absolute. At 17:04, British medical vehicles arrived at the railway siding from the west. 3 trucks and 2 ambulances, marked with red crosses. Medical officers and orderlies dismounted. One officer approached the German guards with hands visible empty. He spoke in German. The guards lowered their rifles but did not surrender them. The officer gestured toward the freight cars. The senior German guard nodded. He produced a key and began opening the external bolts on the first car. The British platoon maintained position at the tree line. The lieutenant observed through binoculars. The first freight car door slid open. People emerged slowly, men, women, some children. They were thin, weak, moving with difficulty. Medical personnel assisted them down to the platform. Some could walk. Others required support. The medical staff began immediate assessment and treatment. The process continued car by car. The German guards assisted with opening doors but otherwise remained at distance. No interaction occurred between guards and evacuees. The medical personnel worked systematically, organizing the survivors into groups based on medical priority. The ambulances began loading the most critical cases. The trucks would transport the others to a field hospital being established in Lübeck. At 17:41, the lieutenant received orders to withdraw. The medical operation was secure. Additional British units were moving up to establish formal control of the area. The platoon's reconnaissance mission was complete. They had located and reported the train. Their role was finished. The lieutenant gave the order to pull back. The soldiers disengaged from their positions, moved to the vehicles and mounted up. The tanks started their engines. The platoon departed the area heading north. As they withdrew, the lieutenant looked back once through the trees. The railway platform was crowded with evacuees and medical personnel. The German guards stood at the periphery, no longer guarding, just present. The freight cars stood open and empty. The scene was distant, already receding behind the tree line. The lieutenant turned forward. The platoon continued north toward their next objective. The war continued. This incident was complete. No combat had occurred. No shots had been fired. The tactical situation that had appeared to require violent resolution had instead resolved through information and restraint. The platoon had been prepared to assault. The assault had been prevented. The reason had been sufficient. The outcome had been different from what training and doctrine had predicted. The soldiers absorbed this as they absorbed all experiences in war, as one more event in a sequence, neither celebrated nor analyzed, simply completed and left behind. The incident was recorded in the platoon's daily log as 1437-1745 HRS. Observed railway sighting 7 km West Lübeck. Freight train with guards present. Identified as civilian evacuees. Medical units assumed control 1704 HRS. No engagement. The entry occupied 3 lines. No amplifying details were provided. No assessment was included. The log moved on to the next entry, evening movement orders and night defensive positions. The battalion intelligence summary for April 28 mentioned the train briefly. Civilian evacuees from concentration camp system located on rail line west of Lübeck. Approximately 200-300 individuals. Medical units processing. German guards disarmed and processed as POWs. The report contained no reference to the British platoon that had observed the scene or to the decision not to engage. That information existed in radio logs and operational reports, but was not deemed significant enough for summary documentation. No after-action report was filed because no action had occurred. The reconnaissance mission had been successful. Enemy forces and assets had been located and reported. The disposition had been resolved at battalion level through coordination with medical and intelligence sections. The platoon's role had been observation and security. They had performed both. There was nothing exceptional to document. The lieutenant's own notes kept in a personal diary contained one entry dated April 28, found train, waited, medical took over, moved north. 4 sentences, no elaboration. The diary was not official documentation. It was personal record, written primarily to track days and locations. The significance of events was not assessed. The entry provided no context that would allow a reader to understand what had occurred or what had been prevented. None of the soldiers involved filed incident reports or requested recognition. No medals were awarded. No commendations were issued. The decision not to engage was never characterized as a decision worthy of recognition. It had been an order followed. Following orders was not exceptional. It was duty. The system did not reward restraint unless restraint was accompanied by visible courage under fire. This had been restraint without fire. It left no trace in the recognition system. The evacuees who had been transported in those freight cars were processed through British medical facilities and eventually repatriated or resettled. Their documentation made no mention of a British platoon waiting in a tree line or a decision not to fire. They had been unaware of the potential danger and therefore could not document its absence. The gap between what could have happened and what did happen was visible only to those who had held weapons and chosen not to use them. The lieutenant remained with his unit through the end of the war in Europe. He was demobilized in 1946 and returned to civilian life in Scotland. He became a teacher. He married. He raised children. He attended regimental reunions occasionally but did not speak extensively about specific wartime events. When asked about his service, he described it in general terms. Reconnaissance work, France and Germany, no major wounds, grateful to have survived. The railway incident, if he remembered it distinctly, was not among the stories he shared. Several soldiers from the platoon maintained contact after the war. Correspondence between 2 of them, preserved in a family collection, mentions That time we nearly shot up a train that turned out to be refugees. The letter does not elaborate. The incident was one memory among many, notable primarily because it was unusual, an operation prepared but not executed. The letter writer's tone is matter of fact, not reflective. The war had contained many unusual moments. This was simply one of them. The German guards who had been disarmed on April 28 were processed as prisoners of war. Records indicate they were held briefly and released within weeks as low-priority detainees. Their names appear in POW processing lists, but with no annotations indicating the circumstances of their capture. They returned to Germany and disappeared into the chaos of post-war reconstruction. Their role in protecting civilian evacuees was not documented in their military records. It was not considered relevant to POW processing. The evacuees themselves dispersed across Europe and beyond. Some emigrated to Palestine, later Israel. Some remained in Germany. Some went to the United States or Britain. Oral history projects conducted decades later recorded some of their testimonies about liberation and survival. None mentioned a British platoon or a near engagement at a railway siding. Their memories focused on the camps, the transport conditions, and the relief of encountering Allied medical personnel. The moment of danger they had not known existed did not feature in their narratives. In 1987, a regimental history of the 11th Armored Division was published. The book covered major operations and battles. The advance toward Lübeck was described in one chapter. The railway incident was not mentioned. The authors had access to war diaries and official records. Those records documented the train's location and the medical intervention. They did not document the British platoon's readiness to engage or the decision to wait. The absence of action left no footprint in the historical record substantial enough to warrant inclusion. The number of people who had been in those freight cars was later estimated through Red Cross documentation at approximately 320 individuals. All survived the transport. Most survived the immediate post-liberation period. Their long-term survival rates varied based on health status, age, and circumstances. But none died on April 28, 1945, at a railway siding west of Lübeck. That outcome, their survival, was determined by decisions made at levels they never knew about, by people they never met, in circumstances they never witnessed. April 28, 1945 was one day in the final weeks of the war in Europe. Thousands of tactical decisions were made that day by commanders at all levels. Most decisions involved action: advance, engage, secure, report. Some decisions involved restraint: wait, observe, hold fire. The documentation system captured actions. Restraint, when it left no casualties and required no explanation, often went unrecorded. A British lieutenant and his platoon spent several hours observing a train they had been prepared to attack. They did not attack because orders told them not to. Those orders were based on intelligence that transformed the situation from military target to humanitarian concern. The transformation occurred through communication channels the platoon did not see, using information they did not possess, involving decisions they did not make. Their role was to wait and then withdraw. They performed that role. 320 people continued living because a sequence of events: observation, reporting, intelligence verification, order transmission, and compliance functioned as designed. The system worked. No one component was exceptional. The outcome was unspectacular. Nothing happened. In war, nothing happening is often the result of luck. In this case, it was the result of procedure. The decision that saved hundreds was not a single decision. It was multiple decisions made by multiple people who did not know each other and who were never collectively recognized for what they had prevented. The battalion intelligence officer who verified the train's cargo, the company captain who ordered the wait, the lieutenant who obeyed and kept his platoon in position. None acted heroically. All acted correctly. The historical record contains a railway siding, a date, a brief notation, and a gap where violence could have occurred but did not. The gap is silent. It holds no names, no drama, no narrative structure that invites telling. It is simply absence, the absence of gunfire, the absence of casualties, the absence of an event that no one needed to document because nothing that required documentation took place. The silence remains complete. The lives continued, the war moved on, and no one knew.